So the assessment technique I decided to try out um, was number 25, which is student-generated test questions. It essentially works exactly the way you think it would. The students are being asked to write their own exam. I used it as a review assignment for the topic of construction safety. It's one of the topics in the course that is relatively difficult to teach. It's kind of a drag. The students don't particularly enjoy it. It's very dry, technical information that doesn't lend itself to lecture particularly well. The biggest problem with this particular section of the course, though, is that students think they know more about safety than they actually do. They spend so much time uh, thinking about safety or discussing safety, studying safety in the field, that they know stuff. They know quite a bit, but there's gaps. There's gaps in their information. There's gaps in their learning. They think they know more than they know. So I split them up into pairs and assigned each group one of the chapters in the book, and then I gave them their rubric, explaining what I was expecting from each of their multiple choice questions. And what I wanted to do was I wanted each of the students to put together a question of what they thought would be the most important thing in the chapter that they were assigned. If they were allowed to ask one question, to really see if somebody could understand the intent of that chapter, what would their question be? So I assigned this to them. I gave them a week. After the week was over, I collected up all of the questions. Then I put them together in an exam format. Once I had the exam built, we basically had a 2 hour long in-class open book review exam. The students were allowed to use their module. They were allowed to work in groups. They were allowed to talk to each other. That's basically the whole point of the assignment. And once that was done, once they'd filled out the test, I graded it. Well, I marked it. It wasn't actually for grades. It was just for review. But I did actually mark the assignments. And then we had another 2 hour session a few days later where we went over it. We discussed what they thought of the questions and whether they thought the questions were good, solid, meaningful questions. And we talked about the context of the question and the material behind it. And basically, I went through the same safety lecture I would have done anyway, clear that this was the best response I could have possibly imagined. I wasn't sure what I would get out of the students doing this assignment. And the feedback, they loved it. They had a blast doing it. They had fun coming up with the questions. They had fun trying to trick each other. The students asked terrible questions in terms of formatting, in terms of the construction of the question. The questions lacked context. They were vague. The distractors were not very good. But because the students had written them themselves, they were asking things that were much harder than anything that I could have gotten away with asking them. So they were actually really being pushed. They were pushing themselves to dig way deeper into the module than I could have ever gotten them to do otherwise. So it was a tremendous process. I will absolutely do this again. I loved it. I very, very badly misjudged the amount of time that that the process would take for me to rebuild the questions in a proper exam format. I had to sort of go through the modules, find each question that they were referring to, and sometimes it was difficult trying to figure out what they thought they were reading versus what was actually in the text. Some of the students they actually included like graphics in their question, and I had to figure out how to get those pictures into the test. Uh, but I mean, that's just insane. Like they took this so much more seriously than I was expecting them to. Like the response was tremendous. The students were much more motivated to take this information seriously than I've ever managed to do before using this technique. In terms of disadvantages, it's hard to judge. On the surface, you do need some real buy-in from the students. On the surface of all this, the students are only actually reading one chapter of 15. There's at least the possibility that they're not going to take this seriously, that they're going to use their classmates to sort of feed them the other answers. They're not going to participate in the discussion. That was certainly my concern going into this. It didn't happen this time. It really didn't. Their final results were better than what I typically expect to get out of them when they finally did write their final exam. They enjoyed it. They were involved in discussions that I never thought I would get out of them otherwise. So in terms of disadvantages, yes, there are potential disadvantages, but they didn't manifest themselves when I actually did this. So yeah, that's I'm thrilled. I'm really happy with how this went, and I will absolutely be trying this out in the future. Thank you very much for your time.